Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're going to continue where we were reading from is the 8th chapter, and just say one prayer before I start. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with a torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respect for the basis also to here. So, we're reading from the 8th chapter, which is Attaining the Supreme. And it's quite an interesting chapter because it talks about what we do just before we leave this world, which is at the point of death. What are we thinking about? What will we be thinking about? How do we try to work out what we'll be thinking about, which will be beneficial to us? And so that's where we left it, and it was quite an interesting description about which explained about the lifetime of a personality who created this world called Lord Brahma. And it talked about that his lifespan was something in the region of 311 trillion years. And mostly, we can't remember what we did last week. What is speaking about going back 311 trillion years? Well, even one lifetime, even 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, 100 years. And I remember I went to Newgrange, it's just outside Dublin. It's a place which was founded by, I don't know who did it, they don't know who did it, but this actually, it's like Stonehenge in England. It's like they had these people who built these amazing tombs, and you could actually, the light comes in at one time during the year, exactly on the 21st of December. So they built it 5,000 years ago with this in mind, and it's a huge structure, it's like a pyramid. And yet it's absolutely accurate every time. So it measured time very clearly for them. So we can understand that they were very, they were very advanced in that sense, very advanced people. And also it was made from 80-ton slabs of rock. So we don't know how they got that 80-ton slabs of rock from about 50 miles away from the hills. Granite, it's a very powerful, very strong stone. So I don't know how they did that. But that's, I remember when we went there as a group of devotees went there, and we were asking the guides, who are the people who built this? And he said, I don't know. I don't know. We don't know who they were. We just don't know. And he was kind of good, he was honest, didn't come up with some story, And but he explained that and he explained to me those facts, that whoever they were pretty intelligent people, But here the Bhagavad Gita is talking about Lord Brahma, whose lifespan was 311 trillion years. And then it goes on to explain that that was only one Lord Brahma. There's many Lord Brahmas, and each universe was like where each Brahma comes from is like the breathing out of Mahavishnu, which is the supreme Mahavishnu. He breathes in and breathes out. So each breath in is 311 trillion years, and breath out is 311 trillion years. So what do you think, lads? What do you think about that? What do you make of that? It's a very long time. But yet, it says that Abrahma Bhuvana Loka Puna Avartana Arjuna, from the highest planet in the universe down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. So, and yet, then when Krishna does then next, after he explains all of those things, he then says that, but there is another nature. There's another nature which is supreme, and it is never annihilated. And when all these universes are annihilated, that part remains as it is. And that is my supreme abode, Krishna says. And one who goes there never comes back. So you're kind of like, he's given this choice, You actually, if you want to go here, you've got to understand that there is a spiritual world, and you can go there, and you can never come back to this world, because it's full of miseries and it's temporary and it's full of miseries. Now, that's kind of a little bit hard for some people to take. What do you mean this place is full of miseries? I follow this football team, or I follow this, and they win, and when I win, I feel really good, Or, my country's doing really well in rugby. Or whatever,
Of Wales anymore.
And so, it's like, when everybody's singing Cardiff Arms Park, with beautiful voices, you think, oh, this is heaven. But yet, the next match they come, they might lose it, and so then there's all misery. But that's kind of the nature of this place, And there's a reason for it. The reason that it's like that is that we don't get used to being here, You can really, really, really work hard and get a small amount of happiness, You can, like, for instance, let me see. Yeah, sometimes in my business, I come across people who've got multiple houses. Maybe you've got 3, 4 houses. One particular one has got a house in Barbados. He's got a castle in the west of Ireland, Very nice person, wife, very nice person as well. Hope they're not listening to this, by the way. But
being comfortable in the material world, making your own place to stay.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to find kind of a comfortable place. I mean, a castle. When I went to see the castle, and then there's tons of grounds. Like, there's all these beautiful flower gardens and everything. But they can only stay in each place for a very small time, and then they have to go somewhere else, and how much can they out? But anyway, the thing that I was thinking about it is that when I was actually, this is why I didn't want to, hope he's not listening, is that when I was actually selling him a piece of artwork, he's a very, very rich person, and it wasn't an expensive piece of art I was selling him, and he wanted to get it, but his wife didn't like it. And then suddenly there was a domestic one. Oh, you're not getting that. No, you're not getting that. No. And so even though he had all this kind of luxury stuff, he couldn't get the little bit of happiness there, just because he wanted something and he didn't get it, it's okay, you know, okay, just leave me alone. And so this is what I'm trying to make out, just a small example of what even if you get so many things in this world, the level of enjoyment that you can get out of it is only very tiny. I can give an even a worse example of that, but I won't, because it's about my life before I became a devotee. Well, okay, I will.
You can't say
You're asking me. But we used to go out every night, you know, and go to the local whatever, you know. And at one time, I actually counted up the amount of times that I had, like I'm talking about practically every night going out, trying to make it have some enjoyment. And I remembered that there was probably 1 or 2 nights that I actually felt that that wasn't bad actually. You know, I think I had an okay time there. You know, it was 1 or 2 nights. And then, but as my life went on, I got to see that a lot of the material things are like that. So many material things are like that. You have so much expectancy of the enjoyment, but actually what you get is only this little touch. And then I read in the Bhagavatam that it's like the enjoyment that you get in the material world is a drop of water if you're in the desert, you know. It's like a drop. Can you imagine? Look, there's water. You need water. It's in the desert. You're completely thirsty, and suddenly you're given a drop of water. You know, you go, oh, that was great. What about the next? You know, until we get the next drop. You know, what's it going to be like? So that then really made it very clear for me that this material world is people get very little, you know, reward. You know, even though it may seem and everyone is having a great time and seems to be everyone else is having a great time, but you know, when you dig deep, I had another client actually, and she used to, her sister used to do psychotherapy with I know it's the Saudi family in London, all the princes. She used to do this. She used to have to really give them psychotherapy basically. But I don't know if she should say this, but anyways, probably some confidential knowledge she probably shouldn't have said. But anyway, her sister told me so it was. But she said that the amount of misery that these guys have is unbelievable. You know, that they're constantly on highs and lows and lows and highs and this and that, and they're miserable. You know, they have so much wealth, so much this, so much whatever. So this is unfortunately the nature of material world. But that's what this has been said. This is the Bhagavatam. This is Bhagavad Krishna, who's the authority here. He's coming in and telling us that, okay guys, this is the way it is. So I made it like this. That's what Krishna says. I made it like that. You know, this is deliberate. It's perfectly imperfect. Because I made it like that so that you can realize that you can't be happy here if you're just trying to enjoy your senses. You know, if you're just trying to enjoy your senses here. You know, so basically, I'm trying to enjoy. So that is not going to give us happiness. And yet every billboard on the way between here and the airport or whatever is telling us, if you buy this, you'll get this. If you buy this, you'll get this. Go next door to Penny's, you know. And go to Eason's if you're into, you know, reading books. You know, if you get this book, you'll read it and you'll be happy and this and this and this. It's constantly, everything is trying to tell us this. But Bhagavatam and Krishna is telling us differently. And what he's saying is that you can only really get happiness if you, first of all, if you give to others, but mainly you can get happiness if you serve Krishna, if you serve God. You know, because that's our position, our transcendental position. We're part of God. We're not God, but we're part of God. And we're designed in such a way that we have this amazing relationship with God. And if we turn to God, we can have this incredible, because we're pleasure seeking, we all want pleasure in that sense. But we can get the fullness of pleasure, you know, happiness, but in that relationship with God. But God is very liberal, and He doesn't force Himself on us. He allows us to make our choice. And so therefore, we have tended to choose differently. We've wanted to choose this. No, I want to be God. I don't want to have to serve something. I want to be served. I want to get things for me. It's for me. And so therefore this place is there. This is what the material world is about. So So this is what's been explained here, but we're on verse number 22, and this is where Krishna talks about this particular aspect. So we're gonna. Some people can follow on the phone if you want. It's in the Bhagavad Gita, 8 chapter 22. Yeah. So. Purusha sa paraparta vachalabhyas prananyaya yasyanta stani bhutani yena sargamitam tatam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is greater than all, is attainable by unalloyed devotion. Although he is present in his abode, he is all-pervading, and everything is situated within him. So the operative word is unalloyed devotion. This is the secret. This is the secret. If you don't learn anything else, but this is the only thing you take back from the class, is that devotion to God. If you learn how to do that, that's the real place of happiness. But we have to practice it as often and as much as we can. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, it is here clearly stated that the supreme destination from which there is no return is the abode of Krishna, the Supreme Person. The Brahma Samhita describes this supreme abode as Ananda Chinmaya Rasa, a place where everything is full of spiritual bliss. All the variegatedness manifest there is of the quality of spiritual bliss. Nothing there is material. That variegatedness is explained as a spiritual expansion of the Supreme Personality himself, for the manifestation there is totally of the spiritual energy, as explained in chapter 7. As far as this material world is concerned, although the Lord is always in his supreme abode, he is nonetheless all-pervading by his material energy. So by his spiritual and material energies, he is present everywhere, both in the material and spiritual universes. Yasyanta Sthani means that everything is sustained within him, with either his spiritual or material energy. The Lord is all-pervading by these two energies. So then the next part, everyone could take. It's sometimes a little difficult to concentrate, but if you can, try your best. To enter Krishna's supreme abode or the innumerable Vaikuntha planets is possible only by bhakti, devotional service. Yeah, that's the message I wanted to get so proud of explaining. As clearly indicated here by the word bhaktya. No other process can help one attain that supreme abode. The Vedas, the Gopala Tapani Upanishad 1-2, also describe the supreme abode and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Eko Vasit as Sarvaga Krishna. In that abode, there is only one Supreme Personality of Godhead whose name is Krishna. He is the supreme merciful deity, and although situated there as one, he has expanded himself into millions and millions of plenary expansions. The Vedas compare the Lord to a tree standing still yet bearing many varieties of fruits, flowers, and changing leaves. The plenary expansions of the Lord who preside over the Vaikuntha planets are four-armed, and they are known as by a variety of names: Purushottama, Trivikram, Keshava, Madhava, Aniruddha, Hrishikesh, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Sridhar, Vasudev, Damodar, Janardana, Narayan, Vamana, Padmanabha, etc. The Brahma Samhita also confirms that although the Lord is always in the supreme abode, Goloka Vrindavan, he's all-pervading, so that everything is going on nicely. Goloka eva nivasita akalatma bhuta. As stated in the Vedas, Svetasvatana, Uttarapanishad 6a, Parasya Shaktir Vivitaya Vishurte, Swabhavika Jnana Balakriyacha. His energies are so expansive that they systematically conduct everything in the cosmic manifestation without a flaw, although the Supreme Lord is far away. So describing some incredible personality there, I think you can understand. Like, not only is he the source of everything, but he expands unlimitedly as well. And each of those expansions as equally as powerful as he is himself. They're equally as powerful. And we are also in expansion. But there's two types of expansions. There's the sphoncus expansions, which is just God. In other words, if you have a candle and you light another candle on it, it's still the same light, you can still pass on the candle. So that same way, the superior potency of God, he can expand like that. Each of the potencies is equally powerful. But there's another expansion of them, which is us.
That's very good.
Which is us. We're the divinants, and we're the part of God. Now, we don't have God's power. Simple as that. We have a tiny portion of it, but we're not God. So this Bhagavad Gita and the whole Bhagavad philosophy explains all about this relationship. That relationship is absolutely first class in the spiritual world. Most of the living entities who are like us don't leave the spiritual world. They stay there and they're, eternally there. But certain living entities like us have left that abode and have tried it out here, which is the next energy of God, which is the material energy, which is, earth, water, fire, air, ether, these material elements. And so suddenly we come into this place, and then we're given what's called a subtle body, to live here. It's like a kind of a suit, space suit. And the suit is our mind, our intelligence, and what's called our false ego. Ahankar.
A point for the guy over there.
Yes, definitely. Yes. So it's our false sense of I, which is called the false ego, because there is a real ego, which is the soul, which is actually in the spiritual world is eternally there. But when it wants to somehow enjoy like God, it comes down here and it acquires a false ego, and and God, it drives me nuts. It drives anybody nuts, I suppose. The amount of nationalism, body identity, it completely drives the world nuts. I'm Irish, I'm English, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a this, I'm a this, I'm a this, and you can go on and on and on. All of these identifications, we're none of those things. We're actually none of those things. Now we may still identify, because we can't just suddenly stop that. We have. Anyway, I'll get into that in a minute, but we aren't any of those things, That's not us. It says on the bus, anyone notice on the buses, it says, is a typical picture of an Irish person. He's like a guy with a pipe or something like this. And says, this is not us. It's good, that's clever at it. But it really isn't.
Yeah.
It's very philosophical. They really got it down. It's not. We're actually the soul. We're the spirit, and but that's what all these wars are fought about. I'm Russian, I'm Ukraine, I'm this and that. I'm a Jew, I'm a Gaza. You know what I mean? You're none of those things. But this is a kind of quite a complex concept, but and this is what we're going to get into in the next few verses here, is that as long as the soul doesn't leave this world at the end of this life, what it does is it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back into this situation here, and there's so much. They're called samskaras, or samskara is something which is a impression. Exactly.
The point.
I'll be out of points, but it's these impressions are there, but they're not just there. We all know, when I was a kid, my mother did this to me and I never got over it, and I'm still remembering it because they did. We have so many impressions that have affected us from this life, and even in this life. But actually, we're affected by impressions from millions of lifetimes, from the previous ones. Because we haven't got out of here, the effect of all those impressions still stay here on us. They're still there. And then the next body, the next false ego that we get, is a product of all those impressions. So it's how we've lived on this life, along with all the other impressions that we're dragging with us. like it's just tons, you know, carrying big weight after us, you know. So that's what we become. But the chanting of Hare Krishna, which is the mantra for deliverance for this age, in that sense, it's a powerful mantra or anything. What that does is that clears all those samskars. Now, there's quality to it. You can't just kind of be, you know, reading the newspaper and chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. You can't do it. It's like some of these guys previously, in previous previous times, they would go to the Himalayas and they would get away from the city completely and just meditate. And by the power of that meditation, they would grind down their samskars so that they could start to think purely again. You know, I have an artist actually who paints out in West Cork, you know, and anytime he comes to cities like this, you know, he says, I want to get out of here quickly, you know, because he just can't handle all the things that go wrong, and he races back to West Cork and, you know, and that's in the material world, but it's like, you know, that's what people do, is because they can't handle all the things, because there's so many impressions, you know, all the samskars, even by living here. And most of these impressions are negative impressions. They're not giving us any positive input, except of course when you meet people like on the street and all the devotees there, they're giving spiritual impressions out, you know. They're giving books, they're giving knowledge, you know. That's what we need to do in society. That's the important aspect of society. What we do is, you know, devotees, monks here, we're out to try to create these very powerful, positive samskars which purify the negative samskars that are there for millions of lifetimes, actually. So, so therefore, we try to get out of this field of birth and death and birth and death. So at the time of death, we're meditating on actually going back to the spiritual world. So, is there any comments anyone wants to ask, any questions? Yes.
What does Bhagavad Gita says about memory? Because if we all have some scars and like we remember verses and passages, and we are born a million times and so on, why don't we remember it? Because, for example, if the saint name clears it all, does it really mean that when you die, like you're always with God, like with Krishna? Because like in once we live, for example, like from the birth until 70 years old, for example, and
I'm 67, so be careful. 80.
No, it's just example. And we don't remember our previous lives or something.
Yeah.
But we remember clearly, as you mentioned, something from childhood and so on. And it all, like, it always was my question. If the time is linear in the material world, but in spiritual, no. Like, why? What is about our memory as a humans in Bhagavad Gita? What does Krishna says about it? And why does it work so differently from, like, from what is considered to be divine perspective? Why don't we remember everything? I don't like get this, you know.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of ways we could mention, we could describe there. Is one is that we don't remember what Krishna remembers. You know, the super soul accompanies it. And that was one of the questions that Arjuna asked Krishna. By, you know, Krishna said to him, Arjuna said, but how is it that you, the sun god is coming from you? I can't remember the exact reference, but anyway, Arjuna is thinking that Krishna is just happened now, just was 5,000 years ago. And Krishna explains, many births both you and I have had. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, Arjuna. So Arjuna, at the point of death, we forget the current, like this current body has with it its own memories that it has with it. And then at the point of death, then that all changes, and then you go into the body. It's very interesting. My granddaughter, you know, she's now 10 months old, you know, and starts, she'll probably say she's just a baby. She's not making any contact, she starts to make contact, then eventually more and more, and now she usually smiles, and you know, and so she's just starting to really get cognizance again. But at the very early stage, obviously, she couldn't remember anything about her. So that's the nature of the world. Krishna set it up like that. I just want to mention.
if you could remember everything, you wouldn't be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And the other point is that by virtue of staunch spiritual practice and an act of providence, one can remember their previous life. I think it mentions that in the Bhagavatam with the deer. And so it mentions it there, and I knew someone who could remember their previous life, and then was Ratnavali, or is Ratnavali, and she was a Hare Krishna monk in the previous life, and she was male, and she died in an accident, a car accident. She had her stomach ripped open, and then in this life, she has problems with her stomach. This is very unusual. But she could remember all the people in her previous life, and some of them were still alive. So she went round asking about this particular person who was male. So she got all the information of the previous life. And then, and you see on the YouTube, people all remember their previous lives. And there'll be some religious connection somewhere. So the reason why they remember their life.
Shall I go Paul?
Well, a question is that
Yeah, and maybe it's just give it a little bit more on this one, yeah. And it's quite interesting because I've noticed about loss of memory. You know, as you get older, your memory gets less and so on. I talked to a brain surgeon one time, and he explained that there is actually holes in your brain, and as you get older, they get larger. But I notice that I can still remember things like verses and things like that, and I notice as well that when I'm reading the philosophy, it's very, very powerful. I may not remember exactly what I just read or something like this, you know, like 3 days later. I have a reasonable idea, but I wouldn't be able to say it verbatim. But when I come back to it and I get it again, there's the memory is strong there. And that's a different type of memory. I think that's the soul. This is my conjecture, that the soul has that type of memory as well, you know, and which is not dependent on the physical, the brain, or any of these other things. Whereas there's this type of memory which is dementia and all those things, which is like that. We had one gentleman here. He joined. It's very interesting. We had an original temple in Dublin. It was in Mountshire Square, which is about a mile and a half from here. And one of the deities, Nisa Sachinanda, were installed there, which are now a minister. But we moved from there, and we moved the deities, but we sold the house. We rented actually. But 10 years later, this gentleman bought this house with his wife, and then they started coming to the temple here. We had another temple in Dublin, and they used to come regularly to the temple, and they used to tell us all about it. Yeah, we bought this house and whatever, you know. But anyway, very, very nice couple actually. She became a very powerful devotee actually, and he was very good as well. But then he developed dementia, you know, and then eventually the only thing that he could remember was, guess what? The Maha Mantra. He used to keep on saying the Maha Mantra all the time, you know, and she gave a whole TV. They did a whole TV program on it as well. And she was explaining about his life and what happened, and how that was all he could remember at the end, you know. So in that sense, there's that type of memory. We have a memory of the spiritual world as well, you know, which is there too.
Yeah, but it's like we remember about it less, I think, because we are not into it. Like mainly, maybe some people develop it, or maybe some of them in some difficult situations when, like. But in general, all we see, like we are kind of sleeping, right? I mean, we don't remember about our spiritual life in general. But sometimes maybe we think that it is something that is a bit closer to it, but then you probably have to die to be there because you can't like.
That's not been my experience, though. To be honest, it hasn't been. Because I tell you what I've been finding more and more, that accordingly as I read these books and Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, you know, the longer I keep reading them, the more powerful they become, the more alive they become, actually. And the idea is ultimately that these books are so transcendental that they are beyond the material realm, and actually they are the spiritual world in that sense. Because Bhagavatam says that, Krishna says that it's Krishna Svatam Bhagavate. I don't remember, but it means that when Krishna left 5,000 years ago, he incarnated as the Bhagavatam, and as the holy name. And then the more that you associate with them, the more then you remember your real nature again. And then Krishna, Prabhupada says, and it says at the very beginning of Bhagavatam, that you can get to see God face to face. It's actually right there. So in that sense, that your real memory, I think, really comes out from the spiritual memory. But that's why we have to practice the sadhana, the constant reading, constant chanting. Although sometimes we may be asleep when we're doing it, and we're not doing it really well. But if we're consistent, if we constantly practice and chant, it's like an Olympic runner. You can't expect to not do any training and then win the Olympics. And we're trying to go back to the spiritual world, which is way bigger than the Olympics. And so we really have to train hard, and that was really my experience. Good point.
I just got to say that I thought that answer to that question was amazing.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Like I feel it's but just because I was wondering, so like, what would you say if you said like you were trying to carry Krishna properly without you can't do it or reading the newspaper, and then you said but that's why the yogis then go to the Himalayas and just but there's nothing, but we've got all the impressions of the city, like your friend from York.
Yeah.
So does that mean we should just go to the Himalayas or go to West York or whatever? And
no, we should go to Wales. To the new temple in Wales. We have all these wonderful rooms where you go in there and you can just meditate.
Come down, everyone.
No, but I remember Brihad Bhagavat Maharaj, Bhakti Brihad Bhagavat. He really made this point one time. He was doing a japa session here. He was teaching. We did a 64 round, which is a 6 to 8 hour marathon chanting. And then at the end of it, he said that, which I thought was really good. He said we should always try to create a place in our day, that we just put aside for something very special like our chanting. And he even said that you should even try to have a place in your house. If you're not living in the temple, for instance, you should have a place where you go and you chant in a very very quiet atmosphere, and that's like your ashram, or place where you meditate, and then you really concentrate then time, and everything that you do is you don't. You have a very positive mentality going into it. You're thinking because sometimes you're saying, I'm going to meditate for 2 hours. Oh God, 2 hours. How am I ever going to do that? You try to develop a real positive frame of mind that what you're going to experience in the next 2 hours, and you put everything else aside. Turn off the mobile phone, even the text message. Turning it down, the sound isn't enough, because sometimes the phone lights up. I don't know what that is, But you try to just give it really that attention, and that actually does it in this age, and specifically the Mahamantra is for this age, and then as well that we take time going to retreats, maybe going to India as well, or going to Ishwara, taking times to go to places where you just give it your full energy, and that really helps. That builds you up so that you can take everything on subsequently, So that would be how we do it, let's say, Yeah.
Guruji, you mentioning that these yogis, they used to meditate, and just by doing meditation they kind of cut their samskaras, right? So I was kind of intrigued how
did they do that?
Yeah.
It's very interesting because the next few verses is going to talk about the time of your leaving the body. Because previously some of the yogis could actually work out what time they leave the body. The waxing moon, the waning moon, you know, the 6 months when the sun is traveling and all of, you know, it's all described. Krishna says it, you know, and then in the Bhagavatam then describes how that you feel the life force or the prana in the belly region, and then you try to bring it to the heart, and then you try to bring it to between the eyebrows, and then you actually shoot at the head. Like basically, that's how they would try to do that. It's a whole process, a whole yoga. So Krishna's saying that that's there in the Bhagavad Gita, that people can actually do that, you know, and they have the potency to do that. But that's not really for us today, and it's quite interesting that the Prabhupada in the purport immediately says that it doesn't matter for a devotee what time he leaves. You know, if he's performing bhakti yoga devotional service, he's going to go there anyway. You know, so that's why the Bhagavad Gita is explaining this particular process as being super powerful. You know, way beyond even what those guys are doing. Because their thing is kind of like a mechanical exercise. They've worked out the process how to do it. It's a scientific thing, and sometimes they only go to the moon planet, you know, or to some heavenly planet, where they stay for a while there and they have so much heavenly enjoyment. But then they come back because they haven't left the whole material dimension. Whereas the science which we're teaching in Bhakti Yoga is like, no, you don't. You'll never come back. You know, you'll actually stay. You'll go back to the spiritual dimension. So, you know, it's kind of like the worst of ages and the best of ages as well. You know, so, but it's interesting to know that. And there was another description which was given there as well. I think it was in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it was taken from one of the Puranas. I don't know which one. And there is so many channels, you know, that the soul can go in. I think there's something like over 1,000. I think it's 1,001 channels, and there's only one of them which is Krishna's describing here, where you actually can go back to the Vaikuntha planets. There's only one of them, so it's 1,000 to 1 shot. You know what I mean? You have to be really expert. You know. You know. I mean, I can't even get up on time in the morning time sometimes. You know what I mean? You know, like these guys are talking about super, you know, analytical study, which, you know, you talk about these computers, but these guys were massively advanced on how to raise the soul from the different parts of the body into the spiritual dimension, you know. So they were really well trained. They had all the shastra to do it, and they still couldn't do it, you know. Whereas we're in the situation we're in, it's actually definitely easier, and specifically for this age of people who are short line. Now it's easier, but it's still it takes a lot of energy. It's like the Olympic runner. I'm going to use that example again. You know, you can't expect to go out and win the Olympics if you just sit and put your feet up all day and watch the TV. You know? But when's the race? By the way, and you go after the first 100 yards, all the guys roll past. You know, because but it is, you have to take it really seriously in that sense. But it's fun and easy, you know.
Right, Rohit. So I had this experience where I should do meditation, and because just by practicing it, doing it every day, I kind of went into a state where it's very peaceful, you know. But the problem was trying to do it every day. So now, and that time I could, in one go, I could do 13 rounds just by closing my eyes, sitting in one place.
You could do?
I could do 13 rounds.
Really?
Yeah, just by sitting in one place, closing my eyes, did not even
That's
open.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Keep doing that. That's
no, but the problem is it's not feasible. You know, you can't just sit in one place because you have to go to work. You know, you have to do a lot of things.
No, that's true.
So,
keep yourself alone.
yeah. So, it's not, but that experience was really good. Yeah. But now since I'm not continuing that process, so now I can't even sit for even one round without losing, because my mind just goes here and there. So it's all about practice.
It is, you know, and you know, just chant with other people if you can. Sometimes that helps. You know,
Yeah.
you know, when there's a group of, you know, on Sunday mornings when we're chanting,
Right.
just come here. You know, even that 4 rounds, I found like
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
it's really uplifting. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, whatever opportunity you can get to do that, I think. But it is the earlier you get up, the easier it is. You know, as long as you're not tired, but you know, get to bed early. That's the thing. But some devotees are very expert at that. I was at a conference, I was up at the Rise retreat actually at that time, and there was one devotee, and he was teaching japa in the morning time. Like this, you know, he's staying in the one place, and he was just chanting like this. I was sitting on the chair and I was going, like, I was just looking, how's he doing that? You know, and then I'd have to get up and walk up and down or something, you know. And for the whole 16 rounds or whatever, he was like that. And then one time I thought, I'm kind of nodding off, you know, and he was going, but then I saw he was chanting his Gayatri, you know. Got me on that as well, you know. So, you know.
Even when we went to Mayapur,
Yeah.
even that time I noticed there were a lot of devotees who could just sit in one place
That's right.
without moving, they were
I know.
chanting.
I saw that as well, you know. Yeah, I like to go there for that reason, you know, sit down with them for a while. But after 2 minutes, I'm up, walking up with them again, you know. But it's very, very important actually. What you were saying though about going to work as well is very interesting because I was listening to a tape where Prabhupada explained that at the time in the 70s there was people who would do this mantra meditation, but it would be for 20 minutes a day, and they were saying that this was great, this mantra. I don't know if it meant anything, but he was saying that in Bhakti Yoga it's 24 hours a day, you know, in the sense that Krishna says, for one who sees me everywhere and everything in me, I've never lost, nor has he ever lost to me. And this kind of measures in with this whole idea of Krishna's expansion, and Krishna is everywhere, and it's mentioned there in the text as well, that he's in every atom, you know, and so we can become trained, you know, for those whose eyes are trained in knowledge, they can see all this. So when we're seeing through the eyes of Shastra or Shastra Chakshu, we're actually getting the ability to see things as they are. You know, to understand the truth by approaching the spiritual master in that sense. You're able to see things as they are, and then you see that God is in everything. So that's how it works out. That it's 24 hours a day, you know, that you can meditate. So that's the thing that, how to put it. Okay, you might not be able to only do a certain amount in the morning time or whatever, but you can train yourself throughout the day to see Krishna as well. That's the whole science as well. So. Okay, so we're just finished.
That's it.
Oh, yes, thank you. So round 2. So,
Come in.
yeah. Do you have one you sing?
Let's sing.
Yeah, please.
Some people call it singing.
You're from Wales. No, you're not, but you're
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
This-
Wales, yeah.
this- you want to hear the...
Oh yeah. Yes. You want me to repeat?
Yeah, please.
No, I think
Thank
Okay. How long for?
We'd be up 2 hours, so but 30 minutes.
2 hours, all right.
2 minutes. And then we start.
30
minutes.
I don't know, I do long here.
Not pretty old, whatever's going on.
Am I too much of a controller if I actually lights be turned off? Or
Yeah, no, please.
get a mood, I like a mood, like a romantic mood. If, okay?
Yeah.
So we're gonna do that? right? I can just stop.
second. Because you guys are new, right?
Yeah.
Wondering what's going on?
Well,
Have you been here before?
No.
Okay. So just so, there's Maha Mantra up there. That's what we're chanting. So it's a form of meditation. So we're all you focus on just the sound of the mantra. You know, we all have problems, we all have things going on. This is a space where you can, well, it's a little echo to this, so, where you can just leave everything and just give some space for your heart. So we're all just chanting this mantra. It's call and response. So it's, at the minute I'm singing, so I sing, you sing, like that. So I'll chant the mantra and there's a certain melody. The melody doesn't really matter, it's more just the sound of the mantra. So there'll be like that. Right, so is that okay?
Yep.
Really nice to have you. You're very welcome. Hare Krishna. Okay, sorry everyone. We're, yeah. Mantras on the roll. It's easy to remember 3 words, you just got to get them in the right order. You can tell I'm not really a musician. So. Don't be shy, give it a go. Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare Rama Krishna Krishna Hare Hare One more, all together. All together, please. Come on.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Is that okay, Manu?
Yeah, let's do this like twice the amount of time. 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Hare Krishna. I mean, what would you like, Manu? What? Another Kirtan?
Yeah.
Okay. Should we do another one, folks?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Hare Krishna. Hot buttons. There we go. Okay. So, if anyone's is too much sitting on the floor, then this is back to Ben. He's from Bristol, but he lives in Wales. At some point he's going to get up and he's going to show you how to dance. It's like spiritual line dancing. Ben will show you. Ben actually, he went to Britain's Got Talent. And he showed his dance to them, didn't you, Ben?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. He didn't prepare. How old are you?
I think it was 8.
He was 8 years old. His father said, "Are you prepared for this?" He's like, "No, I'm just going to go and just wing it. I'm just going to dance." And anyway, needless to say, he didn't make the cut. But for one night only, we've got him here today. So yeah, you go get sure. If it happens. And his legs are feeling good.
I'm feeling sore. So.
Remember his name. Is that my room? Krishna, Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare. Excellent dancing. Did you see why? I don't see why Britain's Got Talent didn't accept. I don't know why Simon Cowell didn't say yes.
Golden buzzer.
Golden buzzer. Andy, who would you like to? For.
No, I've destroyed something.
No, it's okay. It's just a bottle.
So I can't go anyway.
That's it.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm not the main one.
Okay.
I'm always supportive. Supporting role.
Here, I think this is it.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna, everyone together again, please. As loud as you can. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, please.
One more time, everyone together. Hare Krishna, Srila Baba ki Jai.
Oh, come sit here.
Yeah, let's move everything else.
I want to see a bunch of people.
Yeah, I can see you drumming. You were just focused on.
Hari
Hey, hurry!
Hari Hari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare Hare Krishna Hare Hare Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Hare
Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna Hare 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 Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. केशवधृता नर हरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे केशवधृता नर हरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे स्वामी जय नरसिंह देव नरसिंह देव नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव नरसिंह देव नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव नरसिंह देव नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव जय परात्परा 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 जय परात्परा जय प्रहलाद नरसिंह प्रहलाद नरसिंह प्रहलाद नरसिंह जय प्रहलाद नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह लक्ष्मी नरसिंह लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह प्रभुपाद 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 जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय गुरुदेव जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय गुरुदेव जय विघ्नतन सिद्धे भगवान की जय भक्तराज प्रहलाद महाराज की जय जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंद हरि हरि बोल। हरिनाम संकीर्तन की सामद भक्तवृंद की निताय गौर प्रेमानंद हरि हरि बोल।
I gotta say, Ed, this is his first time here. You went to this Bhagavad Gita class at 6, and he stayed for the whole Bhagavad Gita and all of the Kirtan. It's for his first time, so I think that deserves a round of applause. Wow, really amazing. Really amazing.
Good start.
Oh, thanks very much. Cookies. There are 2 cookies. Everyone's got one. You might do one of those. You want 2? Let's see what they're like. We want you in front of the ladies.
Where did you go? Downstairs?
Yeah, yeah.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.